Perfect, thank you. Okay, great. Well, so welcome to this event, everybody. So this is around careers in sports psychology, pathways, practice, and possibilities. And today we've lined up not just one, but two sports psychologists for you. So we're really looking forward to this event, and we're really grateful for the speakers for coming along today. So today we're going to lift the lid on sports psychology, like the different pathways into it, what the typical day involves, the kind of different areas that you can work in. And as I mentioned, we've got two great speakers lined up. So first of all, the format will be that we'll have the two speakers. In between, there'll be like time for questions. But if you want to post something in the chat, me and Andreas can collate that as well. And we can ask those at the end. But also, if you wanted to ask questions directly, you're more than welcome to do so at the end too. So what will happen is that Chloe will go first. She'll talk about her practice. And then there'll be some time for questions. And after that, Cara can go next. And there'll be some time for questions after that as well. So first we'll hear from Chloe. So she is a HCPC registered practitioner psychologist who runs an exercise psychology business, works in private practice, supporting performance and long-term psychological development. So we'll hear from Dr. Chloe Ward first, and then we've got Dr. Cara Arifa Graham. So Cara will share insights from applied sports psychology, including work with organisations such as West Ham, the FA Sports England, giving us a window into how the day-to-day realities of working with athletes and teams work. Okay, so we're not going to do too much more of an introduction because obviously you're going to introduce yourself, but thank you for coming along and I'll hand over straight to you, Chloe.
Fantastic. Thank you, Faisal. I will just try to share my screen. If you could let me know if you can see this, that would be great. You should be able to see an orange and turquoise PowerPoint.
We can, yeah, yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Okay. So if I make it, can you all see full screen?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So thank you very much for having me. It's really nice that there's interest in sport and exercise psychology. I know when I went to university, I didn't know what it was. Nobody else did. I feel like that's changing now. So can you see the next slide, which has got Usain Bolt on it?
Yes, we can, yeah.
Perfect. I'm just checking. Sometimes, yeah, the PowerPoint freezes. Fantastic. So I'm going to start off just by briefly defining what sport and exercise psychology is. I won't go into it in too much depth because I know Kara's going to talk about her day-to-day experience. But just for those of you who are not familiar, so sports and exercise psychology tends to be broadly split into those two areas, although there is a lot of overlap. And really, you don't have to stick within sport and exercise. People find themselves going out into related areas such as business, more general health, and so on. But essentially, what you're doing is using psychological theory and research, as well as therapeutic models such as CBT, psychodynamic, existential, etc., to influence important outcomes in these areas. So the first and most obvious one perhaps is optimizing performance. So understanding what is the role of our minds, our brains in performance? How do we tap into our peak physical potential? So that can be things like trying to manage emotions. So your attention is optimal so you can perform to the best of your ability. It might be pushing yourself as hard as you can, overcoming pain and discomfort and things like that. So how do we get people to get the most out of themselves? Enhancing learning, so helping people to develop skills in a more efficient way, helping mental rehearsal, things like that, helping people to perform more smoothly, better reaction times. So a lot of that is about attentional training, really. So the role of our focus. And then as well as performance, I mean, this does depend on your emphasis because different sport and exercise psychologists have different roles and different goals. But as well as performance, we want people to have a good time in doing what they're doing because, of course, if they find what they're doing enjoyable and meaningful, they're less likely to get burnt out, which is a big problem in competitive sports. More likely to enjoy it, feel motivated, and it's going to contribute to their personal development. So it's how do we help people to have a good time doing their sport? Navigating inevitable challenges. There are all sorts of challenges in sport. Those of you who are sporty might know about this. So things like injury, plateaus, relegation, communication problems, social problems. It might be retirement or transition, going from national to international. So how do we deal with these things in a way that supports good performance and well-being rather than the challenge being something that becomes somewhat of an adversity? Some sports psychologists work to inform organizations on their practice. So, how can we develop a culture in a club or an organization that supports both performance and well-being? And that might be stuff like coach training or looking at how upper management communicates to people, looking at the language used and things like that. So, some people are quite organizationally based, and I'm sure Cara has a lot to say on that. Finally, supporting coaches. So, of course, the way coaches communicate with athletes and how they lead them, how they structure training has a big impact. So, and a lot of that is psychologically informed. So, that might be part of your work too. So, this is not an exhaustive list. I've just picked what I perceive to be the most common things there. And then, if we go on to the next slide, you should see a picture of people doing the plank. Exercise psychology. So this is the more health and lifestyle side of sport and exercise psychology. So again, we're trying to use that academic and professional practice knowledge to increase motivation. We all know there's a big physical inactivity crisis in the West and in other countries now. People really struggle to get active, and a lot of those barriers are psychological. So there's a growing space for exercise psychologists to help people to get more motivated, participate more, improve their health. So that can be motivation, it can be helping people to change habits. So eating more healthily, just being more active in their daily life, or things like doing rehab exercises. I don't know if anyone's ever been to a physio and just not done the exercises. That's quite a common thing. So it's learning how to do the things that help you rather than avoid them. Again, supporting positive experience. So having a good time doing whatever the exercise is, that's one of the strongest predictors of adherence to health and fitness stuff over time. So meaning and enjoyment. Again, navigating barriers and challenges. I won't go into these because I'm short on time, but there's all sorts of sort of negative or uncomfortable feelings that stop people getting in the gym or being active. So it's helping them to overcome those as well. Sometimes working with gyms and health clubs, well-being centres to inform their environments or inform their staff. So how do you set up an environment so it feels really community oriented and motivational and so on? Finally, supporting health professionals. So again, maybe offering CPD courses. This is something I do through my business. So helping personal trainers and physios to psychologically inform what they do to help their clients get motivated to stick to whatever they're doing. So there's quite a broad range of roles that we play. You don't by any means have to engage with all of them. I'm just trying to give you a broad picture. So now I'm going to move on to training routes. I won't go into this in depth because if you're not familiar, it'll be really overwhelming. But just to give you a bit of an overview, in order to train as a sport and exercise psychologist in the UK, you need a bachelor's in psychology or equivalent, which might mean a 2-year conversion degree. And then you do a master's in sport and exercise psychology at a BPS accredited university in the UK. So that would typically be 1 year full-time or 2 years part-time. After that, that's what we call stage one. After that, you have 3 options at the moment, although this might be changing because I think the BPS routes might be up in the air. So you've got British Psychological Society, what we call CASES, Chartered Association of Sports and Exercise Sciences, or you have the university route, which is essentially a professional doctorate. So they're all pretty similar. The difference is that the BPS and the CASES routes are independent. So what you do is you enroll, you get a supervisor, and you have to develop a plan of training to get experience and document evidence of that experience, as well as submit academic pieces of work to essentially show the assessors that you are developing in the right areas and you're meeting these criteria. So you have to organize everything about your training there. Your supervisor might help you a bit, but that is very much on you. And that typically lasts 2 to 4 years, depending on if you're doing it full time or part time. And there's one key difference between the BPS route and the CASES route, and that when you train through the BPS, you end up as a sport and exercise psychologist, and they encourage you to, while most people do more sport, they encourage you to do exercise as well. Whereas actually with CASES, you can specialize in one or the other. So that's interesting if you're just interested in one or the other. And the prof doc is done through university. It is essentially it's 3 years full time, up to 6 years part time. it's partially taught. So it's not as taught as your undergrad would have been, or like a taught master's. Some of the things are taught, others are not. You still have to go out, find your own placements and things like that. The benefit of it is you have a sort of structure to work to in terms of term times, which can make it a bit easier organization wise. But otherwise, there's really not a lot of difference content wise between the different routes. Now, KCs assess things slightly differently. I won't get too much into the details, but I will tell you a little bit on this next slide here. So, if you want to know what kind of work you have to do to complete these training routes successfully, all of them require you to do so many hours of client work, face-to-face client work. So typically that's about 500 of FaceTime. And generally there'll be about 2 hours per hour of FaceTime for reflection and preparation. So at the end of it, you've probably got, I don't know, like 1,500 hours or something like that. And you have to evidence this via a portfolio. So it isn't like, I guess, standard university where you submit mainly just kind of research support reports and essays. This is an evidence-based kind of professional practice portfolio. You have to submit it at various intervals depending on how long a time you're doing this over. So this is mainly composed of things like reflections. So this is a really reflective, it's a very reflective qualification. It's not just academic. The assessors want to know that you are actively reflecting on, making sense of, and learning from your experiences with clients. So you can then put that information into future work. So becoming a reflective practitioner. So that's a skill that you really have to build on. There are case studies of work you've done and clients that go into real depth. So the assessors know how you work, why you work that way, what the limitations are, and so on. So it's really a lot of the writing you do is based on activities you do out there instead of just the academic stuff. But then there are academic pieces of work. For instance, in cases and the prof doc, there are a couple of essays. For the BPS and the prof doc, you do have to engage in a doctorate level piece of research. So that can be independent research, one study, or it can be a couple of systematic reviews. So there is that research piece to satisfy the criteria for the BPS and the prof doc. And the rest of it is essentially a practice log. You have to log absolutely everything you do. If any of you are seriously considering doing this, my biggest tip would be do that as you go along. Do not leave it to the last minute. It's a nightmare. So every day you have to be logging what you're doing. And finally, at the end of your training route, you'll have a 2 hour viva, which is a verbal exam. So essentially, the assessors will sit and interview you and find out if what you produce verbally is the same as what you've written. So they're wanting to find out how you've developed. They'll ask you all sorts of questions about how you work, what the challenges have been, and what you think your biggest areas of growth are, and things like that. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. If you want to know more details, you can go and look at the handbooks on the various different websites. They are pretty heavy. So I think there are probably some easier to access resources out there on the internet. But I think, yeah, it's just knowing, I think, the nature of it, evaluating whether you want it to be entirely independent, how long you'd like to do it over, and so on. But I'm going to give you a few more pointers about private practice now, because that's something that you will almost definitely have to be involved in at some point, unless you get a job in an organization full time and you're off, which is not the case for many people. And I'm going to talk to you about some challenges with the training process, things that I wish people had told me, essentially. So, setting up a private practice. I've always worked entirely independently. That's just my choice. Just to be honest, I like being self-employed. But I know lots of colleagues who are permanently full-time employed. It really depends on what suits you and what opportunities you want. If you want to set up a private practice, honestly, it comes down to business skills and it is a real learning curve. And I would suggest reaching out to as many people as possible who might know something because it's a steep learning curve. They do have a module on the Casey's route. I would really recommend that route. I think it's set out really nicely. They do have a business skills module on that, so that's worth knowing. So this involves accurately defining your work in a client appropriate way, which is challenging, and knowing how to tell people about what you do without over promising or using overly technical language and that kind of jazz. It's about marketing yourself, making connections. Now, this is the hardest thing. So, if you are somebody who's quite shy, introverted, this is going to be super challenging. It doesn't mean you can't do it, but I think I wish somebody had said to me at the start, it is challenging. It's meant to be challenging. You have to work at it. So, the best way really of marketing yourself is making connections to people, preferably face to face, because the people you're going to be contacting to try to find work are busy. Everyone's busy. You'll send out a lot of emails and get no response, cold calling type stuff. So a lot of this is about reaching out to people you think might benefit from your work, inquiring and saying, "Hi, I'd love to have a coffee with you, set up a meeting, find out what you do. This is what I do. Is there a way to collaborate together?" Without being too salesy. So this is the thing. It's not even standard business skills. You have to have that ethical sort of mind as well in terms of not over-promising, not trying to be too salesy. Because we're not just selling a product, we're actually building relationships and trust so we can build a good foundation for legitimate psychological work. So that bit's really challenging. So if you are thinking about doing this career path, the best thing you can do is start talking to anyone you know that is remotely related to sport. So maybe coaches, maybe people who work in gyms, that sort of thing. So they might have connections. And if you're connected to somebody who is connected to the person you want to speak to, that helps a lot. So it's all about connections. And you have to organize client sessions and all the administration yourself, inform consent forms, all the different invoicing things, finding out where is appropriate for a client session. You'll notice on the right there's a picture of a nice consultancy room that you might associate with counseling or psychotherapy with a big cross through it. And that's because most sport and exercise psychology doesn't really occur like that in nice boundaried settings. It can occur all over the place in a hotel, in the changing rooms, on the pitch, at the side of a track, anywhere, on a plane, or it can occur in those rooms. So I do have a room like this that I use more psychotherapeutically. But a lot of sports psychology in particular is in the action. People want you to be there to communicate with them as they're training, about to perform, or whatever. So it's challenging. So the final point there is part of setting up your own private practice is knowing where is an appropriate location or a platform like this. And if you're going to use a platform like this, what do you know about where the other person is, where the client is when they're speaking to you, particularly if it comes to young people, minors, and things like that. I don't have time to get into that, but essentially, these are all the key things you really need to be thinking about and thinking ethically about as well if you want to set up your private practice. And I'm going to finish off just by talking about a few challenges that I wish I'd known about and carving out your own niche. So, challenges, very blurred boundaries, as you might have gathered from that photo I've just shared. You can be traveling with teams. I'm sure Cara knows a lot more about this, so I'll leave much of that to her. The locations are not ideal for private conversations sometimes. It's tricky. Clients will naturally project that the pressure they have to perform onto you and often expect the work to happen really quickly, and you have to really deal with that. So you have to work with your supervisor closely to be able to manage that pressure that they're projecting onto you. It's just the nature of it. Knowing how organizations work, if you go into them, the chains of command, who does what their attitudes are, that could save you a big headache and lots of problems. I'll leave that to Cara. Gaining client work can be really hard if you don't have a placement. Honestly, you probably have to be prepared for patches where you have nothing at all for months. So it doesn't happen to everyone, but it happens to more, I'd say the majority. So I think just be prepared for that. It helps to maybe have a part-time job alongside if you don't have that solid employed position. Finally, you must be conscientious and organized to do this. Honestly, it's so challenging to organize all of this. There's so many moving parts, deadlines that nobody's really holding you to, apart from, I mean, it's not like university where you can sort of keep on getting extensions necessarily. It's just a nightmare if you're not organized. So I think one thing to do before you set out on these career paths is to think about, how are my time management skills? Do I need to think about, I don't know, how I focus better, how I organize my time, what works for me. So those are some things I wish I'd known right from the very start. And finally, just for this last minute, shaping your career, I'll hand over to Cara in just a minute, who can tell you much more about her daily life. A lot of people put off sport and exercise psych because they think it sounds really niche, and it can be. You can be super niche if you want to. You can be, I'm the golf psychologist for this tiny set of people or something. But actually, it doesn't have to be. It can be very broad, and it doesn't have to look like the traditional picture of sport and exercise psychology. So just to give you a very quick run through of what I've been doing, just isn't, and this isn't by any means reflective of anyone else necessarily. I spent 8 years lecturing at an undergrad and master's level at a university, not just in sport and exercise psych, in all sorts of things. So you can branch out there as you gain experience. I do quite a bit of organisational work. I create content and courses for businesses, things like that. I've moved into broader psychotherapeutic and personal development work because I guess that's the stuff I really like, the kind of deep self-inquiry, that sort of thing, with a particular focus on depth psychology and Jungian psychology. So that's just an example of how you can weave in your own personal interests and take pathways off the main pathway, I suppose. And as Faisal said at the start, I'm a co-founder of an initiative called Psychology of Movement, which is an exercise psychology business. So we do one-on-one stuff with people, we do group programs online and in person, we do talks and workshops, CPD courses, and that organizational consultancy. So again, that was just me and my colleague meeting and connecting over a shared love of exercise and wanting to get people active. So and I have a Substack for that as well. So there's lots of different things you can do, essentially, in ways of using your own creativity and interests. So that will be everything from me. I'm aware I'm short on time. So thank you very much for listening. I welcome any questions, and I hope that was helpful. Okay.
Thank you, Chloe. That was fantastic. That was so insightful. It was really interesting to hear about the pathways into it and also about all those tips around private practice. That was really useful. So yeah, thank you very much. So
Could I
before we
ask,
move,
oh, sorry, could I ask one or two quick follow-up questions, Corey? So,
Sure.
doctorate, is it paid or do I have to pay?
Great question. You have to pay.
Okay, good. Because I think there are different, like the BPS, right? Some of these are okay. So, and is it? I think for clinical psychology, in particular, the concern is just getting into a doctorate or getting into master program. I mean, master program for clinical, not. But it's like, how hard is it to get into a master's program for sports psychology and or then into a doctorate or any like these other pathways? Could you just like how? Say a word about that.
Sure. Yeah, far, far easier. You'll be pleased to know.
Okay.
So with master, it depends on how competitive the master's program is. Some of them, they generally demand anywhere between a 2-2 and a 2-1. If you're talking about Loughborough, because of its reputation, you might be better off having a first, but generally it's 2-1, maybe 2-2. So yeah, they're reasonably easy. And in terms of the prof doc, it's probably going to be a little bit more challenging than the masters. But I think if you get to the point where you get a decent grade in your masters, you're halfway there anyway. And again, nowhere near as competitive as clinical. You're not waiting for 5 years plus to get in. So yeah, relatively easy.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, I think
oh,
there's a
we've got
question.
yeah, there's a question in the chat as well. So they're asking, I actually wanted to know this as well. Which
Yes,
route
that's
you
true. Me
took?
too.
So what doctorate route did you take after your undergrad? So I did BPS, the BPS route, but I'm training as a KC supervisor, so I know quite a bit about that one as well. And um, it's each. I won't say too much about this because I don't want to influence you overly. I think KC's is really, really well set out. There's a lot of information and guidance they provide. There's lots of interesting CPD things on there. So yeah, I think if I'd have gone back, I probably would have done KC's, but BPS is fine too. Yeah, you're
All
welcome.
right.
Great. Okay, any other questions from any students? So one is asking how hard it was to find a supervisor.
Great question. So not very hard for me because I came across my supervisor who's called Brian Hemmings. at a BPS sports psychology masterclass during my master. So I just went to BPS events. So you can meet sports psychs that way. And I met Brian, immediately got on with him. He runs a dual program with somebody called Dr. Jonathan Katz, who is also a counselling psychologist. So actually, if any of you are in the Rugby Northampton area or you're prepared to travel there, they run a fantastic group program. So it wasn't hard for me. It can be hard if you don't make connections beforehand, but what I would say is that there are tons of supervisors out there. So it's just a case of figuring out which supervisor seems to engage in the sort of work you want to engage in, and do you get on with them? Most important thing.
Great. Okay. And one other question as well from Olivia. How and where would I find events to go to relate to sports and exercise psychology?
Good point. So both KCs and BPS advertise them, and I wouldn't be put off. I wouldn't be put off if you're at an undergrad level. Don't be put off by that. I just went. I didn't think to myself, I'm not a sports psychologist. I just went along. So I think you can find them on there. Um, if you just search, UK sports psychology events, on Google, you'll find some things as well. Some unis run them. And there's the annual conference for what they call DSEP, which is the Division of Sport and Exercise Psychology. That's a great place to go if you want to network, just chat to people face to face. So yeah, I would just give it a search, but otherwise BPS KCs and uni websites. Yeah.
Great. Perfect. Thank you. Okay. So if there's any other questions, you can put them in the chat and maybe we can pose those at the end if you don't mind staying around, Chloe.
Sure.
Perfect, thank you. So what we'll do now is we'll move on to Cara. So this perspective will be more around sports psychology in an applied setting, more of a sports performance setting. So over to you, Cara.
All right. Thank you, guys. And thank you, Chloe. I think she covered a lot of very, very important stuff there and some things I wish I'd known. Um, I'm hoping everyone can see that perfectly well. So, my name is Cara. I actually didn't train in the UK. I trained in the US, which I don't think makes any difference. It just meant that the way I have come about getting my roles has been slightly different. So I did all three of my degrees in the States, and they do everything completely different in America. But it allowed me to just kind of transfer into being HCPC qualified. I did my undergraduate as a psychologist, did my master's actually in health promotion, specializing in sports psychology, and then did my PhD specializing in female student athletes. So kind of a different approach from Chloe's, but no less, no more inferior, no more, no better or no worse than kind of what her approach has been. So just a different angle and kind of just to highlight to you guys as well that there are different ways of doing the same thing. There's not just one clear route to be able to become a sports psychologist. And my route to this point has been unconventional for some, but it's worked and I would do it all again the same way. So I was a lecturer before I started going into organization. So like Chloe, I worked at a university teaching on undergraduate, masters and PhD courses in sport. So not even just in sport psychology, but in sport as a broader term. And then kind of found my way into these roles. And I'll talk to you guys a little bit more about that. So what we're going to look at today is kind of like what do we actually do? Like on the ground, it's very good learning the theory of it, but on the ground, it moves at 110 miles per hour, which is fantastic if you don't like slowness. But if you're somebody who likes a lot of structure and a lot of knowing what's coming in the next move, I can confidently say sports psychology is not the world for you unless you go into a different realm. But I'm going to talk about my time at West Ham with the women's team and with the academy girls and at the FA and kind of I work with private clients, but because I think Chloe's touched on that, I won't waste your time or energy with that. Um, I was going to give a real kind of case example, but I think you guys probably have an understanding. But we'll touch on some things and hopefully you kind of get some answers. Had this question, but Chloe completely mastered in terms of what you hear or what do you think of when you hear sports psychology. So gonna skip over that. So what is it really? What does it look like on a day to day? It's looking at helping athletes performing under pressure, managing mistakes, helping them stay in focus to build confidence and navigate identity beyond sport, which is all really well and good. when we talk about it, but what does that look like on the ground? So I think the biggest part about when you start to work within an organization, and I loved Chloe touched on this slightly before, in terms of you work as part of an MDT. You are not working in a silo, you're working as part of a bigger organization than yourself. And that takes away a lot of autonomy as a sports psychologist because every organization has a way of delivering things. So the FA has their way of delivering sports psychology. West Ham will have a culture of the way they want it to deliver it. Each team that you work with and each culture, each pocket of people or team will have their way of delivering it. So if you've got a niche, if you are the super vibrant person and you want to go in and you want to do arts-based sports psychology and you want them to start painting, I can promise you every organization is going to be like, yeah, no, we don't do that. Like that's a really lovely idea, but that's not what we do. And that's not to say that what you're doing is wrong. It's just that they're not going to give you that level of flexibility within an organization because you work within part of a team. So this is the players and the staff are in blue on the side when we went out to the Euros with the FA. So the MDT team, when we think in the world of football, is you've got coaches, physio, nutritionist, strength and conditioning, lifestyle support, player care, safeguarding, doctor, team manager, analyst, and then I'm going to put in the kit man because they are legendary in the world of football. And if you don't treat the kit man properly, you are absolutely screwed because they dictate everything you do and how clean your kit comes back to you. So it's all of these moving parts that you're dealing with, and also all the information that you're getting about players, whilst you also then have to think about confidentiality. You also then have to think about what do you relay to the coaches? What do you relay to the physio? The physio also has confidentiality in terms of how much they share with you. So, for an example, we had a player at the championship who tore their ACL. Everybody kind of suspected it, but it wasn't allowed to be discussed because of confidentiality until the player themselves had announced it to the rest of the team. So the physio knew, the doctor knew, safeguarding had suspected it, but until it's shared by the player, you're kind of holding on to maybe a really valuable piece of information. Or if you're on a camp and a player has had a bereavement in their family, you know it because they've divulged that information to you in a session or they message it to you. But can you go and tell the coaches? So I would say when working within these organizations, whilst it's fantastic and you're working with all these different people, the struggle then does become in terms of confidentiality. How do you share it? When do you share it? Who do you share it with? And knowing that at the same time, you still have to be able to hold him within your own boundaries because a coach doesn't have the same level of expectation that the HCPC or the BPS have of you. The nutritionist doesn't have the same expectation. So it's you also staying true to yourself and almost staying in your lane and knowing, okay, I have this one job to do and I can't really get distracted by other people. It's embedded. So the one thing I do love about working within organizations is embedded into everything. So the training environment are asking, okay, Cara, how can we possibly enhance the psychological skills of the athletes during training? Player development. So I'm touching base with absolutely everybody during the course of my working day. Performance reviews, looking at a game and saying, okay, what did that look like? How was that athlete performing? And then competition preparation. We have a 3 game week, for example. If we have a game on a Sunday, a Monday, and a Sunday and a Wednesday, sorry, Sunday, Wednesday, and a Sunday, we call that a 3 game week. How can we prepare an athlete to maybe do 3 lots of 90 to 100 minutes? Are they mentally capable of making all those decisions? Are they able to do all those things? So I always joke with anybody that I work with in that sports psychologists have the best job in these kind of environments because we get to touch base with everybody. I need to talk to the nutritionist. I need to talk to the physio. I need to talk to the coaches. I need to talk to player care. Everybody on that list at some point, except maybe the kit man, but that's just somebody who I think should always sweet talk. I have to touch base with. So it's if you're not somebody who is able to have those quick conversations, it becomes a very, very stressful job. So if I look at kind of working with the academy players, so my time at West Ham, I was working with academy players. The issues and challenges that they're looking at are kind of confidence swings, fear of having making mistakes, pressure to impress because they want to sign contracts. The thought of signing big contracts are coming up. Identity tied to performance, balancing life and sport. Because you got to think at an academy, you are 15, 16, 17 years old. They have to be in school. They have to be able to balance their academics and their high level football or their high level sport. So you have those challenges within just them also being able to perform. And so it's a balancing act that you're trying to kind of support. If I look at my time with the first team players, you've got a lot of similar things, but Chloe touched on it as well. You've got burnout, transitions, balancing life after sport. The big one for me was always contracts coming up for re-signing. If they've relocated themselves, their families, their kids, whatever the case may be, and they now have to re-sign a contract, or it's actually, France, a team in France wants to sign you, but you spent the past 4 years in London. You've now got to think about they've got to move schools for their kids. They've got to find doctors and all the other moving parts. And one of my big philosophies as a practitioner is understanding that an athlete is more than just their playing time. The things that go on around them play a bigger part in their performance than any conversation I'm going to give them. Any psychological tool, I can give them all the meditation and all the worrying and all the, let's start goal setting. But if their life outside is not moving in a positive way, there's nothing that I'm going to do that's going to override that. So I like to start with the outside and work our way onto the pitch rather than worrying about the pitch and working our way outwards. And then going on international camps brings a whole level of challenges by itself. We are on camp for 10 days, sometimes minimum, sometimes 3 to 4 weeks, and maybe sometimes 2 months, depending on what the championship is. Reselection, are they getting called up? Just because you got called up for the first camp does not necessarily mean you're going to get called up for the last camp or the middle camp. You're moving sometimes if you've been called in, you've had fantastic season, and you got called into one of the last camps. Everyone else has created their bonds, their relationships. That impacts how a lot of players perform as well. Confidence kind of coming into a new environment, knowing that everyone's kind of created their friendship circles. And then the club environment that they've left or will be returning to can impact how they perform on site. So all of these things are three different environments that cause for three different versions of a sports psychologist, if I'm being completely honest. And it's moving at speed. So if I was to give you here, this is my day on site. I arrive at site at 8 o'clock in the morning, get changed because they have the kit there, which is why I say be very kind to the kit man because your kit will be waiting for you. Get changed, grab a coffee, and then I'm prepping for the day for about 45 minutes. Who needs to be seen? What athlete needs to be seen if I'm working in a club environment? What does that look like? At 9 o'clock, I've got a staff meeting. Staff meeting will be okay. These are the players who are injured. These are the players who are doing modified training. These are things that might have come up in their wellness check-in in the morning. So that's just a notice for all of us to know, okay, this is what's happening. Players will start arriving on site. Meeting with players within a club setting moves at 155 miles per hour. Because as they come in, their day is scheduled very, very tightly. So I'm grabbing players as they're having breakfast. I'm pulling players aside whilst they're having breakfast. Hey, can we have breakfast together? So I laughed when Chloe pulled up the nice, tidy little meeting room. I did have a meeting room and I never used it because I'm grabbing players on the fly. I am grabbing players in the hallway. I am grabbing players walking towards training, just trying to gather a touch point with them. And you've also got to think in one-to-one settings in private sports psychology, you've got one player. You might have a duo if you're working with, two tennis players. On any given team, there are 20 to 30 players that you are touching base with at all times. And unfortunately, because sports psychology within the world of football and those environments is still quite new, there's one of you, 30 of them, and 10 staff members who are asking you, hey, just by the way, have you been able to touch base with this person? They looked kind of sad. And you become almost a mop-up person with player care and safeguarding to just try and wrap around those players because it's moving at speed. Players will start arriving on site, player meetings. So I will be in all of the match day meetings, training meetings, those kind of things. Players will go into the gym around 11 o'clock. I will try and be in the gym. Again, it's a quick way for you to get a touch point. It's about developing relationships. If I'm only the person that comes and is like, hey, tell me about your feelings. 99% of the time, they will just shut down. I've had players tell me, like, I don't speak to sports psychologists. I don't need a psychologist. I'm not weak. I don't have anything wrong with me. I'm fine. So it's about developing relationships. So I am in the gym. I have been known to be on the bike and doing like having conversations with players whilst I am blowing, trying to catch my breath. The players will then go out onto the grass. Depending on the weather, depending on what's going on, I will go out on the grass. I've been out there in pouring rain because I think it's important that the athletes see that you're not just somebody who stays in the office and that you are in the trenches with them and it is freezing cold and you are showing an interest in what it is that they do in the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then sometimes I'm meeting with safeguarding, I'm meeting with player care, and we're trying to get some information about what's happened during the course of that day. Lunch, medical room. I'll hang around in the medical room. Player one-to-ones will be scheduled at that time as well. The medical room for any sports psychologist is the key to all answers of what is going on in the environment because for some reason that's where athletes become the most open and honest. Then you have staff meeting again. We'll be training with you what went well, what didn't, what players struggled, what players were having mental struggles, performance struggles, whatever the case may be. Again, without divulging any private information. So again, you've got to start or always be thinking about, am I saying something that is confidential? Then I kind of wrap up my day with notes, reflections, and plans. The plans never go to plan. And if every one of my days looked like that, I would be a really happy bunny. But 9 times out of 10, like I said, you've got 20 to 30 players with 20 to 30 different issues moving in at any given point. You have to be able to think on the fly. You have to be able to be reflective on the move, I think is probably the best way to describe it. It is not a time where you can be like, hey, you know what, can I get back to you in 2 to 4 days whilst I go off and read a research article and I come up with a 6 week plan? They kind of need an answer within the next 60 minutes. Can you give them something that's going to support them and that they can start implementing immediately rather than something that is going to be a long 6 week, 6 month plan? In the midst of all of that, you've got players coming in on loan, players leaving on loan, players there's just so many moving parts at any given point. Developing quick relationships is really important. The difference when I then go with England, this is what a match day -1 looks like. It is scheduled from 8 until 9:30 at night. Breakfast, wellness, the tech meeting I wouldn't need to go into, but player status meeting, who's injured, who's not, who's reported poor sleep, who's reported the niggle from yesterday isn't as isn't a niggle, but they think it might be more. Session brief before we go into a game, travel into a game. They have their individual prep where then they're at training for a while. They will do recovery, we travel ice bath, smoothie station. So that's what the players are doing. But this is also a time for me to start seeing athletes in their environment. How are they after training? Especially match day -1, teams are going to start getting selected. The first to the starting 11 is going to be getting selected. That is when you start to see people getting a little bit more antsy, a little bit more irritable, a little bit more kind of on edge. So it's all of these kind of environments that play a big part into how they're showing up. And also for some players, they just don't enjoy camp. It's just not a fun thing. This is their schedule for the next 10 days. It is exhausting and it goes through until 9:30. They've got a roommate, there's no downtime, there's no alone time. It can become quite intense. So it's being aware of all those things. But again, acknowledging that you're not going to find time. There's no time in here right now. There's no scheduled one-to-one sports psych time. You're going to have to find it. You're going to have to grab it. You're going to have the authority and the confidence is probably a good word to go and grab an athlete and saying, hey, you look like you're struggling. They're not going to come to you. You're going to have to go to them and they're going to probably tell you, no, I'm fine. And it's trusting that gut and your instinct and saying, actually, no, I'd really like to have a conversation and almost being insisting on it. Even if they shut down, at least you've done your part and can say you've been ethically sound and followed through on an issue just in case that shows up later on. So 3 things I wish I'd known. Experience matters as much as knowledge. Getting as much experience within the environment. I'm not even talking going in as a sports psychologist. Do you know somebody that you can shadow within these organizations? Do you know a coach that you can just shadow within the sport that you're passionate about? Shadowing and having as much of an understanding of sport as a whole. So not so much do you know what the offside rule is. I knew nothing about football until I walked into a football's pitch, into a football organization. But I do understand the intensity of football. I do understand the intensity of that environment of high level sport. But the more you can learn before you get into those environments, I would recommend. If it's athletics, do you need to be able to go and just follow a coach for a week and understand a training environment? What does that look like? Relationships drive impact. So Chloe really talked about this. I'm not going to hammer it home, but the relationships you build, not just with organizations, not with coaches, but also with the players. If you can't build a relationship with the players quickly and efficiently, you are almost doomed to fail. If they don't trust you, if they don't believe you, if they think that you're telling tales, it's never going to work for you. So relationships, not just for your own professional development, but within the role are super, super important. And finding a quick way to do that. You don't have 6 weeks to develop a relationship with a player. You really need to be able to do that in an efficient and a genuine way within about 6 days because you don't have 6 weeks to then develop a relationship and then another 6 weeks to put an intervention in place. The season's finished, or they've gone out on loan, or they're injured, or they're not actually even in the starting 11 anymore. It moves at such speed, you need to be able to develop those relationships very, very quickly. The pathway within organizations takes a lot of time. I think from where you are now to doing a master's, getting supervised, and then ending up in an organization, it takes time and it's okay that it takes time. And exploring other avenues whilst you're waiting actually will be beneficial because it allows you to see your role from different angles. If you go into that environment coaching, if you go into that environment in safeguarding, you have an understanding of that environment that is invaluable. Another role that's coming up, which is great for psychologists, is player care, player well-being officers that can get an idea of the environment very, very quickly and still be working on your pathways that kind of Chloe was describing before. So there's other ways that you can get into that environment and learn and get experience without being in the role as a sports psychologist whilst you're working as a sports psychologist. Um, I won't even bore you with a real athlete scenario, but there's different interventions that go in, and I think you kind of know that. But sports psychology on the ground is it's applied. It is taking is how quickly, I think is the best way to say it, how quickly can you take the theory that you've been taught and deliver it to somebody in the most basic, understanding, easy to digest way? Can you apply it? It is not, do you have an understanding of it? That's the first step. But can you explain it and meet the person where they are from a 34-year-old mother of two to an 18-year-old to a 14-year-old? Can you relay that information in a way that they can easily digest? It is developing the relationships with other sports psychologists, with the coaches, the nutritionists, the physios, everybody within that MDT, but also with the athlete or the person that you're working with right in front of you. It is embedding yourself into the sport culture and then about helping people perform and thrive in their environment. I think if that is your main goal, if you are the type of person who thrives on seeing people succeed within their sport or exercise, and you're like, I don't even, it's not about Olympic medals, it's about somebody saying, I used to get really nervous about going to a particular part of the gym and now I go into it and I lift those weights and I feel confident and great, then I think sports psychology or sport and exercise psychology is definitely for you. Um, Volunteer as much as you can, build coaching experiences, shadow people, develop communication skills, practice that, practice talking to strangers quickly, practice being able to pitch, do elevator pitches, and kind of talk about what is it that you do in 2 minutes or less. Because the world of sport moves so quickly, you do not have time for a lovely, 20-minute PowerPoint to describe why you should be good at, you should be in this role. Can you do it to a coach who has got a bag of footballs over their shoulder and a bunch of hurdles under their arm? Can you do it at speed? Can you say it to a physio? And if you're making a relationship with a physio, can you say it to them whilst they're rubbing somebody's calves out and their client's on the bed screaming and in pain because they've got a knot? Shadow as much as possible in as many ways as possible. And that's actually a big challenge because organizations have confidentiality. You're not going to be able to sit in with clients. So can you shadow and at least get an understanding of the environment? And then stay curious about people, stay curious about the different ways you can get involved within organizations if sports psychology is important to you. and I will then go over to the questions. I think I saw something come up.
Great. Thank you, Cara. That was so fascinating. So yeah, so there's a question in the chat, but does anyone have a question they'd like to ask?
I think there's one question about what volunteering experience or work experience would you suggest to look for to benefit your pathway? I think that, yeah, I think you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think it's about coaching is definitely a big one. I think looking for shadowing opportunities is the first point of call. Like, who can you shadow within the environment? Who can you have conversations with?
Could
Relationships.
I? So
Yep.
let's say if like I used to play a lot of football.
Mhm.
Okay. So would it be now I want to become a sports exercise psychologist? Would I then start coaching football or maybe have like I don't know in a grassroots team? Is that kind of the experiences you would like volunteering, or would it be more trying to get like somewhere like maybe taking on a role in a grassroots football organization? To, I don't know, you said like player welfare or something like that. Yeah, what kind of role would I take on in
I
the
think
volunteering?
it would be both work. As long as you have a clear direction as to where you want to go, and Chloe, feel free to jump in at any point here. But I think both work in terms of if you want to go into player care and get that understanding, coaching, fantastic, you get an understanding and you can start implementing some of the stuff that you're learning whilst you're coaching, because that is what psychology is. It is coaching in a different sort of way. So that I think that is very beneficial. And I actually wish more coaches did psychology. So I think that has its avenue. I think there's also something to go into a grassroots team and saying, you know what, with your supervisor's permission and with it being ethically sound and somebody overseeing you, can I do some free sessions with your grassroots team that allow me to get an understanding or to at least put something into practice? So I think there are other ways, but I would say have a clear direction as to where you want to go. Because the tendency is you'll start coaching, realize you hate coaching. That's not what I want to do. I want to do more psychology, and you start to drift. Whereas if you have a clear direction and say, okay, actually, I'm going to be an assistant coach, and I'm going to be the person who helps them with their psychology whilst they're coaching, and I'm going to be that kind of that side person, then you're still working towards something, and can it align with the training that you're already doing? Don't do anything that's not going to help and align with training that and the direction that you're trying to head into.
All right, fantastic. Chloe, do you want to add anything?
No, I think Cara did a fantastic job there. I mean, the only other thing I would add from an exercise perspective, if any of you are interested in that, is you can get experience as like a gym instructor or something like that. So I used to work as a PT, and so I was sort of starting to think, okay, what are the psychological challenges here, and how might I use psychological principles? So yeah, I would just say you could do something similar in the exercise zone. And of course, if you play your own sport, I mean, this isn't formal experience, but I think you can start to build. I think what Cara said about understanding the environment is so important, you know, how they work. And I think just reflecting on your own experience in competitive sports and thinking, actually, how would I deal with that? Or how would I work around that if I was in that position? I think is a great idea. But yeah, I think Cara's covered everything there.
Great. Okay. There's a couple of more questions in the chat. So one's from Courtney. How did you secure your first applied opportunities working with athletes? So that was to both of you.
Um, I would probably say mine's slightly unconventional because I used to be an athlete. So I had that kind of easy touch point. And then working within the world of the university, I got pulled in that way. So kind of a two-pronged attack in almost in terms of one, working with athletes. Having been an athlete, I knew a lot of other athletes. So you're already in that world, which made it easier. But working within the university, you've got a pre-existing group of people just already there within like the Bucks athletes and things like that, and finding your way over into that world. And again, they're always looking for volunteers, looking for help, looking for different people. I know when I was at university at UEL, they were looking for sports psychologists to work with the athletes. Again, it was a it was an opportunity for me to kind of shadow and look and see if that would work. But I think there's opportunities there within spaces that you probably already exist in, and it's looking to see like, hey, who's helpful right now? Like who can actually bring me into that world and not being shy. I think Chloe really spoke to it, which is you can't be shy. You've got to have that business mindset. You've got to be a little bit pushy and advocate for yourself and say like, okay, I'm going to start asking people, can I at least just come and watch you do a session? Can I come and do something? So my first job at West Ham was a lot of just kind of being in the right place at the right time. And I started off as an academy, sports psych, actually sports psych and player care. Was it player care? Or education officer, excuse me. So education officer and sports psych. So it was a dual role that they were trialing out. So looking at clubs that maybe don't have those, could you volunteer to do that? And say to them, okay, can I do it on a trial basis for one season or half a season? And kind of being a little bit pushy and going after the areas that you're passionate about.
Great, thank you. And how about you, Chloe? What was your first steps?
Literally, so I came from an athletics background, and it's bizarre at the time. I found that hardly anyone in distance running specifically was interested in sports psych, which still stuns me to this day. So I guess yeah, I didn't have much luck in my own sport, which was baffling to me. But so I actually got my first client through my dad's golf club. So my dad just shared around. He said, "Oh, my daughter's starting as a trainee sports psychologist," and people came forward and also speaking to people who were at like local tennis clubs and stuff. They knew the manager or the head coach and got me a conversation. So I think using, as Cara said, using your personal connections, because if you're a known quantity, there's just that tiny bit of trust there already, and they're prepared to give you a bit more of
Mm.
time of day. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you both touched on this, but I think networking's so important in any kind of pathway. But yeah, that's making those connections is like so important for our students to do as well. So we have one other question as well. Would you suggest doing the work experience alongside doing the doctorate, or could you do it before it and just apply when you know with your undergraduate degree? So I guess that would be for you, Chloe. That's okay.
Well, that's just doing the work experience alongside. You
Oh,
can absolutely do it before, if you have the skills to do the role. I mean, I would say there's no harm in even delaying the doctorate or the stage two if you want to just take some time, as Cara said, to get some quality experience of the training environment. Because honestly, as somebody who had never been in a competitive team environment before, I cannot imagine how stressful it would have been if I had gone into one of those early in my training pathway without having had experience. So honestly, take a year out and yeah, do some assistant coaching and things like that. So no, it can be before or during. I think both would be super valuable. There's an element of transferable skill stuff on at least I think on all three training pathways actually. So for instance, I still worked as a PT alongside training as a sport and exercise psych. That's not explicitly psychological work, but because I informed it with psychology and I did a little bit of psychology in my sessions, it was counted as some client hours. So I think it's experience, but it could be counted as hours during the doctorate or the pathway as well. So um, yeah, does that answer the question?
yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Chloe. So yeah, another question from Courtney around how you both come from a lecturing background. So would you say this was really beneficial in your process to becoming a sports psychologist?
I would say no. Whilst I love to be in a lecturer and it's definitely something I would go back to. I don't think it's a necessity. I don't think it takes anything away. I think it can add in terms of kind of your understanding of delivering information quite quickly, delivering complex theories in a very simple way. I think it helps in that regard. But I don't think it's something that has to be done or that you need to do personally. Um, but yeah, Chloe might have a different perspective on that.
I would totally agree with you. It's absolutely not an essential. I don't think it makes, there are many other things you could do that have more obvious transferable value. Um, I'm in a bit of a weird situation because I lectured at the University of Buckingham, which is a 2-year degree. They cram it all in. It's really small classes. So I would say there was something unique about Buckingham, which is really regular, tiny group tutorials. So that I think helped me a lot in terms of learning to reflect quickly on the fly to different people in the room because a lot of it was quite personal psychological stuff. So I think that helped with almost group therapy settings or if you're working, yeah, with groups. But again, that's quite a specific benefit. And I think I don't know about you, Cara, but it certainly helped my confidence with speaking in front of a group of people, just learning to get your authority across, which I feel like sometimes you need to do with some groups. Um, but yeah, you practice not kind of you practice well, I was about to say not being too nervous, but actually you can be nervous but still go and do it anyway. So I think those things, but yeah, as Cara said, you do not need it. It's just where you find yourself, isn't it? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, I think Charlotte has a question for Cara. Do you want to ask your question, Charlotte?
Yeah, what interested me is that Cara came from the US to the UK. I think my question is, would you say that from doing all of your education in the US and then traveling to the UK, was it really difficult, or considering the career you're in, would you say that it's possible or easy to go anywhere and everywhere?
Ooh. So question is, would I say that it's easy to transfer that experience from the US to the UK?
Yeah, and I think even in addition to that question, since you're in football, if hypothetically you wanted to go back to America or Canada and do it for an ice hockey team or a baseball team, is that a potential thing that you can do?
100%. I think the experience I learned here, I would transfer that anywhere. And the experience that I got in the States, so I was a student athlete in the States, allowed me to have an understanding of team environments because even though I ran track, it's an individual sport, I had a team. We had
Mhm.
teammates, we were in a very different kind of culture. So I think it is very transferable. I think it's just the way you approach it. And if don't you don't tie yourself to a particular sport and you start looking at it as the environments, the expectations, the demands, I think that the hop back and forth is actually a lot easier than people give it credit for. Because once you know what it looks like in an ice hockey team when they have to travel, or basketball, for example, who are on the road more times than they're not, and you kind of see that within the world of football, I think you start to see like, hey, the pressures are the same. It's a different sport and it might be a different gender, a different culture, but the pressures and the expectations and the challenges of the athlete as a whole are actually the same. So I think it's I haven't found any challenges with it. So I'm UK born, but 13 years in the States, and I found the transition to be actually really helpful and really easy. And it's what you get in the States collegiately you don't get here. So I was able to transfer a lot of
Mhm.
stuff and have a lot more experience than people who are coming out of the UK system just because I came from the collegiate system in the States and the expectation and the demands of that.
Okay. And then I want to ask, is there any specific reason why you moved back? And would you say that it could be more difficult to get into this career in the US?
I moved back because of COVID, and that was the only reason why. I moved back mid-COVID because I was in the middle of Texas at the time. I just finished my PhD and I was there on my own. So that was the only reason, to be honest with you, that I moved back. My intention was to
Mhm.
stay. No, I think there is way more jobs in the States in this career. You don't have to do the HCPC, you'll do I think it's the CMPC. So there's a different qualification, but it's a similar kind of training, the similar kind of expectations in terms of the amount of hours. I don't know how easy it would be for you to transfer those hours that you do here over to the States. So that would be a challenge to look at before you started if you were going to the States. But in terms of jobs, you've got to think there are 328 Division One schools in the US. So that's 328 jobs in D1, 344 D2 schools, 298, I think, D3 schools. So those are just university jobs. Then we've got the pro teams, the semi-pro teams. I think there's a better understanding and appreciation. I think the UK is just now catching up in my mind to the demand of sports psychology and the impact that it can make on an athlete. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, I would love, I mean, if a University of Iowa, for example, called me, I would be gone in a shot just because the thought of being there would just be like, yeah, I'm out of here. And also you've got the luxury of working within a team dynamic in terms of being a sports psychologist, you might just be specializing in soccer and swimming. And that would just be your little niche, but you've got other sports psychologists who are working with other teams on that campus, which I think can only be beneficial. Um, and it's just a very different environment. So for me personally, I would love to go back to the States, and I think they have a different approach to it. But
Mm-hmm.
I do also love what I do here. So I think they both have their benefits.
Okay. Um, Sorry. Then would you say that it's if I was to pursue this route, it would be easier to go to the US and start there than to start here and then move?
I don't know if I'm completely honest with you. I couldn't say because the process is to be completely qualified in the States, you would have to do, I think it's 500 hours as well. I think you'd have to see if they can translate it or kind of so I was able to bring all of my transcripts and give it to the HCPC and they were like, hey, yeah, we'll qualify you. If you can do the same with the US, look into that beforehand and then that might help you make your decision. But I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Great, thank you. Well, there's no other questions in the chat, and it's about, well, we've gone about 10 minutes over now. So thank you both for staying longer. But that was so fascinating. It was so interesting to hear about like the diverse pathways and how it can unfold in sports psychology. So thank you very much. And hopefully it sparks something for our students as well. Hopefully they'll be considering how it can apply to their pathways.
No problem. And if anyone's got any questions or anything, like feel free to share my details and I'm happy to answer questions as best as I can.
All right,
Likewise.
fantastic.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.